The story of plants begins not with leaves or stems, but with microscopic organisms invisible to the naked eye about 3 billion years ago, long before any creature walked on land. A revolution was happening in Earth's ancient oceans. Cyanobacteria had developed something extraordinary. They could capture sunlight and convert it into energy. This process, photosynthesis, would change everything before. Cyanobacteria, Earth's atmosphere, was nothing like what we breathe today. There was virtually no oxygen, but cyanobacteria produced oxygen as a byproduct of their photosynthesis. They released it into the water, and eventually into the atmosphere. This took hundreds of millions of years, but the results were profound. We can see evidence of this transformation in rocks, billions of years old, banded iron formations. Those distinctive layered rocks with rust-colored stripes tell us a story about ancient oceans. The oxygen that cyanobacteria produced reacted with dissolved iron in the seawater. The iron essentially rusted and sank to the ocean floor layer after layer built up over vast stretches of time, creating these formations that geologists study today. Another window into this ancient world comes from stromatolites. These rocky dome-shaped structures formed when communities of cyanobacteria trapped and bound sediment in shallow waters layer by layer. They built up over time. Remarkably, stromatolites still exist today in places like Western Australia, giving us a living glimpse of what Earth looked like billions of years ago. Perhaps the most significant legacy of cyanobacteria was what they gave to other organisms. At some point, a cyanobacterium was engulfed by a larger cell that could not photosynthesize. Instead of being digested, it survived. This partnership created the chloroplast. The larger cell provided protection, while the cyanobacterium provided energy from sunlight. This union gave rise to the ancestors of all plants and algae that photosynthesize today. The oxygen revolution set the stage for everything that followed. The Cambrian period presents a world that would feel completely alien to us today. Picture temperatures hovering around 120 degrees Fahrenheit across much of the planet. This intense heat came from carbon dioxide levels far higher than anything in recorded human history. During this time, roughly 541 to 485 million years ago, true plants had not yet ventured onto land. Instead, green algae dominated the oceans. These soft, simple marine plants thrived in the warm, shallow seas that covered enormous portions of the globe. Life underwater offered everything these early plants needed. Water surrounded them, completely providing direct access to moisture and dissolved nutrients. Sunlight filtered down through the shallows, fueling photosynthesis. But something remarkable was about to happen as the Cambrian gave way to the Ordovician period. Plants began their first tentative steps onto barren rock. This transition from water to land was genuinely difficult. Plants faced challenges they had never encountered before. The earliest land plants were non-vascular, meaning they possessed no specialized tissues for transporting water. Without these internal water conducting systems, they could not pull moisture from the ground and distribute it throughout their bodies. Every cell needed direct access to water, which meant these pioneers could only survive in perpetually damp environments. Think soggy shorelines, muddy banks along streams, and constantly wet rock surfaces. Reproduction presented another hurdle entirely. These early terrestrial plants reproduced through spores rather than seeds. Spores are single-celled reproductive units that require moisture to survive and germinate. The land plants of the Ordovician were essentially living at the water's edge, never straying far from the safety of wet conditions. They were pioneers, but fragile ones, testing whether the land could support plant life at all. The Cambrian period presents a world that would feel completely alien to us today. Picture temperatures hovering around 120 degrees Fahrenheit across much of the planet. This intense heat came from carbon dioxide levels far higher than anything in recorded human history. During this time, roughly 541 to 485 million years ago, true plants had not yet ventured onto land. Instead, green algae dominated the oceans. These soft, simple marine plants thrived in the warm, shallow seas that covered enormous portions of the globe. Life underwater offered everything these early plants needed. Water surrounded them, completely providing direct access to moisture and dissolved nutrients. Sunlight filtered down through the shallows, fueling photosynthesis. But something remarkable was about to happen. As the Cambrian gave way to the Ordovician period, plants began their first tentative steps onto barren rock. This transition from water to land was genuinely difficult. Plants faced challenges they had never encountered before. The earliest land plants were non-vascular, meaning they possessed no specialized tissues for transporting water. Without these internal water conducting systems, they could not pull moisture from the ground and distribute it throughout their bodies. Every cell needed direct access to water, which meant these pioneers could only survive in perpetually damp environments. Think soggy shorelines, muddy banks along streams, and constantly wet rock surfaces. Reproduction presented another hurdle entirely. These early terrestrial plants reproduced through spores rather than seeds. Spores are single-celled reproductive units that require moisture to survive and germinate. The land plants of the Ordovician were essentially living at the water's edge, never straying far from the safety of wet conditions. They were pioneers, but fragile ones, testing whether the land could support plant life at all. Something remarkable happened during the Silurian period, about 443 million years ago. Plants figured out how to stand up. Until this moment, land plants were essentially flattened against the ground, unable to lift themselves upward. But the evolution of vascular systems changed everything. These internal networks allowed plants to draw water from the soil and transport it. Throughout their structures, a complex organic polymer called lignin provided the structural support necessary for upright growth. Interestingly, scientists have found lignin in marine red algae, suggesting that the raw materials for this innovation existed long before plants ever ventured onto land. The Devonian period followed, spanning 419 to 358 million years ago, and it brought a wave of transformative developments. For the first time, recognizable soils began to form. Plants developed sexual organs, specifically designed for reproduction. Their stems gained vascular tissue for water transport, woody tissue for structural support, and tiny openings called stomates that allowed them to breathe. This combination of innovations set the stage for something unprecedented. Forests, one tree in particular, dominated these ancient woodlands. Archaeopteryx grew tall and spread its canopy across the landscape. What made this possible was secondary vascular tissue, which produced genuine wood. These were not simply oversized herbs, but genuine trees with the structural integrity to reach toward the sky. Alongside these towering plants came Alkinsia, an early seed fern that represented another crucial step in plant evolution. The impact of these forests extended far beyond the shoreline. As plants spread across the continents, they pulled carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in massive quantities. This process gradually cooled the planet, transforming Earth's climate over millions of years. the oxygen levels rose as well, creating conditions that would eventually support entirely new forms of life. What started as a biological innovation for moving water had become a force capable of reshaping an entire planet. By the time the Carboniferous period arrived about 358 million years ago, plants had already transformed Earth's surface. But something even more profound was about to happen. Plants began developing specialized structures that would change everything. They started producing seeds. This might not sound revolutionary at first, but think about what seeds actually represent. Before this moment, plants reproduced through spores, which required water to survive and spread. Spore-producing plants needed damp environments to complete their life cycles. Seeds changed the game entirely. A seed contains a tiny plant embryo, packaged with its own food supply, all wrapped in a protective coating. This meant plants could wait out harsh conditions, they could travel long distances, they could colonize places that were previously impossible for plant life. The first seed-bearing plants were called gymnosperms. The name literally means naked seed, because these plants produced their seeds on the surface of leaves or on the scales of cones, rather than tucked inside fruits or flowers. Primitive conifer trees appeared during the Carboniferous, alongside ferns that had already established themselves in the wet forests. Then came the Permian period, roughly 299 million years ago, and the climate began to shift dramatically. The world started drying out, vast swampy regions disappeared, replaced by more arid landscapes. This drying trend drove rapid evolution. Advanced conifers emerged with better adaptations for conserving water. Cycads appeared with their distinctive palm-like appearance. Though they were not actually related to palm trees, ginkgos also evolved during this time, trees so resilient that some species survive to this day. The spread of seed plants represented one of the most significant ecological innovations in Earth's history. For the first time, plants could truly conquer the interiors of continents, far from the reliable moisture of coastlines and wetlands. They could survive drought. They could wait years for the right conditions to sprout, and they could spread across barriers that had previously stopped plant life. Cold, the seed revolution opened entirely new frontiers for the greening of our planet. The Triassic period began about 251 million years ago, and the plant world had entered a new era of dominance. Seed-bearing plants now ruled the landscape, and they did so with remarkable efficiency. The gymnosperms had truly come into their own. Cycads spread across many regions, their stout trunks topped with crowns of tough, feather-like leaves. Ginkgos thrived too, with their distinctive fan-shaped leaves, catching sunlight in forests that would have felt strangely familiar yet alien to modern eyes. Conifers expanded their reach, becoming the towering sentinels of ancient landscapes. What made these plants so successful was their reproductive strategy. Seeds allowed them to colonize areas that spore-producing plants simply could not tolerate: dry regions, rocky slopes, and nutrient-poor soils posed no obstacle. The seed was a tiny package of survival, containing an embryo and its own food supply, protected by a tough outer coating. This was evolution at its most practical. Then the climate began to shift as the Triassic gave way to the Jurassic. About 201 million years ago, the world became wetter. What had been arid stretches transformed into lush, humid environments. This change triggered an explosion of plant growth. Massive jungles spread across the continents, and conifers dominated these verdant expanses. Some grew to astonishing heights, creating canopies that filtered sunlight down to the forest floor. The air would have been thick with the scent of resin and decaying plant matter. Something else appeared during the Jurassic, though it attracted little attention at the time: flowering plants. The angiosperms made their first tentative entrance onto the evolutionary stage, but they were bit players in this drama, minor components of an ecosystem still thoroughly dominated by gymnosperms. The cycads and conifers had no idea their reign was approaching its end for now. This was their golden age, a time when seed-bearing plants had reached their peak diversity and abundance. The great dinosaur herds that roamed these Jurassic landscapes fed almost exclusively on gymnosperm foliage. It was a world built on cones and seeds, a world that would soon face competition from an unlikely source. The Cretaceous period began about 145 million years ago, and something extraordinary was about to unfold. Until this moment, the plant world had been dominated by gymnosperms. Those seed-bearing plants like conifers, cycads, and ginkgos that had ruled the landscape for millions of years. But a new kind of plant was about to change everything. These were the angiosperms, and they brought something entirely new to the world: flowers. What made these plants so revolutionary was their reproductive strategy. Instead of relying on wind or water to carry their genetic material, flowering plants developed a compact package. They housed both male and female reproductive organs within a single flower structure. This arrangement might seem simple to us today, but it was a game changer. The flowers could attract insects and other animals to help with pollination, creating partnerships that would prove incredibly successful. The explosion of angiosperm diversity during the Cretaceous was remarkable. These plants spread rapidly, adapting to practically every environment they encountered. They developed fruits to protect and disperse their seeds, giving them another advantage over their competitors. The fossil record shows an incredible burst of new species appearing in a relatively short span of geological time. As flowering plants flourished, familiar trees began to appear. Oaks, maples, willows, and magnolias all trace their origins to this period. The landscape was becoming recognizable to modern eyes. Meanwhile, the conifers that had once blanketed the continents began retreating. They found refuge in colder regions, particularly at higher elevations and latitudes where the new flowering plants struggled to compete. This pattern persists today, with conifers dominating northern forests and mountainous areas, while angiosperms claim the warmer lowlands. By the time the Cretaceous period ended about 66 million years ago, flowering plants had achieved something unprecedented. They had become the dominant plant group on Earth, a position they still hold today. Roughly 90% of all modern plant species are angiosperms. This was the culmination of hundreds of millions of years of plant evolution, and it reshaped the entire planet.